I am Beatrice, 64 years old, a retired teacher from Boston. My son James and I were once inseparable until I received his wedding invitation with my name crossed out. The ultimate shock came a week later when he sent me a $90,000 bill with a note saying, "Be thankful I let you contribute." Little did he know I had my own way of turning his dream wedding into something he never expected. Where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and join me as I share how I handled this heartbreaking situation. Life has a way of testing our strength in ways we never anticipate. After my husband Thomas died in a construction accident, when James was just 5 years old, I found myself facing the daunting challenge of raising our son alone. With a teacher's salary barely covering our basic needs, I took on bookkeeping work at night after tucking James into bed. Those years were difficult, but watching my son grow made every sacrifice worthwhile. I can still remember pushing back my retirement for 6 years to ensure James could attend the university of his choice. When his tuition increased unexpectedly in his junior year, I sold my grandmother's antique jewelry collection that I had hoped to pass down to his future wife. Nothing was too precious if it meant giving my son the opportunities his father would have wanted for him. Our bond was built on small traditions that became the foundation of our relationship. Every Sunday morning, we made pancakes together with James, gradually taking over the mixing and flipping as his little hands grew more capable. During summer breaks, we would camp at Lake Winnipesaukee, spending our evenings counting stars and sharing dreams around a modest campfire. I beamed with pride, watching James graduate as valedictorian of his high school. His speech even included a special thank you to me that brought tears to my eyes and a standing ovation from other parents. In those moments, I felt that all my hard work was paying off in the best possible way through the thoughtful, brilliant young man my son had become. The changes began during his college years at an elite East Coast university. His calls home became less frequent, and when we did speak, he talked more about exclusive parties and less about his studies. The brands of his clothes suddenly mattered in a way they never had before, and he began making comments about our home being quaint rather than comfortable as he had always described it. After graduation, James moved to New York for a position at a prestigious financial firm. Our physical distance grew into an emotional one as he became more immersed in a world of wealth and status that was entirely foreign to me. His visits home dwindled to major holidays, and even then he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and making excuses to cut his stays short. Then came Sophia. The first time James mentioned her, I could hear a different tone in his voice. She was the daughter of Harold and Margaret Harrison, prominent figures in New York society, whose family had connections to old money and luxury real estate. When James sent me a photo of them at a charity gala, I noticed his new designer suit and the confident way he stood beside her, as though he had always belonged in that world. My first video call with Sophia left me with an uneasy feeling. While polite, her smile never reached her eyes when James spoke about his childhood or our family traditions. When she saw my living room in the background, she commented that it had potential with the right designer, a subtle criticism that James either missed or chose to ignore. Still, I was determined to welcome her into our family, hoping that my initial impressions were simply the product of nervousness on both our parts. As the months passed, our calls became shorter and more formal. James began speaking with different expressions and referencing people and places I had never heard of. Whenever I asked about his life, his answers were vague, as though he was presenting a carefully curated version of himself. The boy who once shared everything with me was disappearing behind a facade I barely recognized, and my heart ached with each conversation that widened the gap between us. The engagement announcement came during a brief Sunday evening call, almost as an afterthought. "By the way, Mum, Sophia and I are engaged. We're thinking about a spring wedding next year." No excitement in his voice, no invitation for me to share in his joy. Just a clinical statement of fact that left me struggling to sound enthusiastic enough for both of us. "Oh, James, that is wonderful news. I am so happy for you both." I said, trying to mask my hurt at how casually he had shared such important news. When can I see you two to celebrate? After some hesitation, he suggested dinner the following month with Sophia's parents. The Harrisons want to meet you, and it would be good to get everyone together early in the planning process, he explained, though his tone suggested obligation rather than desire. That dinner at Le Cirque was my first real glimpse into the world James now inhabited. Harold Harrison ordered wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget without even glancing at the price, while Margaret discussed their winter home in Aspen and summer retreats in the Hamptons, as casually as I might mention a trip to the local grocery store. Beatrice James tells us you were a teacher, Margaret said, her voice carrying a note of polite curiosity that somehow made my 30-year career sound like a charming hobby. How quaint to dedicate yourself to such noble work. Yes, I taught 5th grade for 32 years, I replied, feeling the weight of their evaluation. I found helping shape young minds incredibly rewarding. Harold nodded absently. We donate substantially to educational charities. Perhaps you have benefited from some of our foundation's work. Throughout the evening, wedding discussions flowed around rather than with me. Whenever I offered a suggestion about venues or traditions that might be meaningful to James, Sophia would interject with, "We were actually thinking of something more elegant," or, "That might be a bit too simple for what we have envisioned." James, who once valued my opinion above all others, now deferred to every preference Sophia expressed. When I mentioned the beautiful local park where he used to play as a child as a possible ceremony location, he winced visibly, before Sophia smoothly redirected the conversation to the merits of various 5-star hotels and historic mansions. As coffee was served, I gathered my courage and addressed the financial aspect directly. I have some savings set aside for James's wedding day. It is modest, but I would like to contribute what I can to help with the costs. The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes before Sophia broke it with a tight smile. That is very sweet, but Daddy always planned to give me a proper wedding. We have quite specific plans that are already in motion. James avoided my eyes, adding, "The budget is handled, Mum. You do not need to worry about it." Later that evening, as I excused myself to use the restroom, I overheard Sophia speaking to her mother in hushed tones near the ladies' room. Her idea of a gift is probably some handmade quilt or family recipe book. Can you imagine at our wedding? My son's muffled response made my heart sink further. I will talk to her. She will understand that things are different now. Over the following weeks, I tried to maintain our connection through weekly calls, but James frequently rescheduled or cut conversations short. Each time he had a ready excuse about work demands or social obligations that could not be postponed. The son who once called me his best friend was systematically removing me from the important moments of his life, and I was beginning to understand that his wedding would be no exception. The first sign that I was being deliberately excluded came when I saw photos on social media of an engagement party I had never been told about. The elegant rooftop celebration featured James and Sophia, surrounded by fashionably dressed guests, raising champagne flutes against the Manhattan skyline. My own son had not thought to invite his mother to celebrate his engagement. When I called him the next day, trying to keep the hurt from my voice, James sounded defensive before I could even ask about the party. It was just a small gathering Sophia's parents put together at the last minute. Nothing formal. The photos showing at least 50 guests in evening wear told a different story, but I swallowed my objections. I understand. I would just like to be included in these moments, James. They are important. Of course, Mom, he replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Things have been moving quickly. Weeks later, I learned about the bridal shower from Sophia's Instagram posts. When I mentioned it during our next call, James sighed audibly. That was really just for Sophia's friends and family, Mom. You would not have known anyone there. The exclusion continued with the bachelor and bachelorette trips to Las Vegas and Paris, respectively. Each time James had a new excuse. It is just for close friends, or we thought you would not be comfortable with the activities planned. Concerned and confused, I reached out to Michael James's childhood friend, who had remained close to him through college. Over coffee at my kitchen table, Michael shifted uncomfortably before finally speaking the truth I had been avoiding. Beatrice, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Sophia has made some comments about you being too provincial for their social circle. She thinks your presence might make some of the guests uncomfortable. And James, what does my son say about this? I asked, my voice barely steady. Michael looked down at his cup. He does not disagree with her. I am sorry, Beatrice. I have tried talking to him, but he says you would not fit in with the people who are important to his future. The realization that my own son was embarrassed by me struck deeper than any physical pain I had ever experienced. The child I had raised to value character over status now found me unsuitable for his new life. I made one last attempt to address the situation directly with James, calling him on a Sunday, when I knew he would be less likely to use work as an excuse to avoid me. James, I feel like I am being systematically excluded from your wedding preparations. This is hurting me deeply, I said, no longer hiding the pain in my voice. His response was cold and rehearsed. Mom, you are making this about you when it is our special time. Sophia and I have a vision for our wedding, and we need to consider what makes us comfortable. And I make you uncomfortable now? I asked the question, hanging heavy between us. Not exactly, but you have to understand that the Harrisons have certain expectations. Their friends are influential people who could be important for my career. As the wedding date approached, Sophia's parents took complete control of the guest list and venue decisions. James called less frequently, and when he did, he was often critical of my manners and appearance, offering helpful suggestions about how I might present myself at the wedding. Maybe you could update your hairstyle, Mom, something more sophisticated, and please do not bring that old clutch purse you always use for special occasions. Despite the financial strain, I purchased a new dress from an upscale department store, hoping it would meet their standards. When I sent James a photo, his lukewarm response crushed what little hope I had left. It is nice, Mom, but probably not suitable for the venue we have chosen. Perhaps something more designer would be better. With each interaction, it became clearer that the problem was not my clothes or my manners, but my very existence as a reminder of James's middle-class origins in a world where he was desperately trying to belong. The wedding invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope with gold embossing that felt foreign in my simple mailbox. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, only to find my name crossed out with a single line of black ink. A handwritten note was attached. Beatrice, we need to discuss the wedding arrangements. Please call me James. That evening, the conversation I had been dreading finally took place. James's voice was distant, clinical, as though he was addressing a difficult client rather than his mother. Mom, after a lot of consideration, Sophia and I think it would be best if you did not attend the ceremony or reception, he said without preamble. You are uninviting me to your wedding. I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The guest list had to be adjusted for space considerations, and the Harrisons have many important connections who need to be accommodated. He continued as though reciting from a script. We feel you might not fit in with the crowd, and that could be uncomfortable for everyone. Tears streaming down my face, I struggled to comprehend what I was hearing. James, I am your mother. How could I not belong at your wedding? After a pause, he offered what he clearly thought was a generous compromise. You could watch from a distance during the ceremony. There is a small alcove in the garden where you would not be noticeable to the other guests. The suggestion that I should hide in the shadows at my only child's wedding broke something fundamental inside me. I see. Thank you for being honest, was all I could manage before ending the call. I spent that night clutching old photo albums, tracing James's face from infancy through childhood and into young adulthood, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had my love not been enough? Had I somehow failed to prepare him for the world he now inhabited? But it was the email that arrived the following week that truly defied comprehension. The subject line read simply, Wedding Contribution Request. Inside was a detailed spreadsheet itemizing costs for what could only be described as an extravagant celebration. Luxury Manhattan hotel venue, $35,000, designer bridal gown, $15,000, premium catering and open bar, $20,000, honeymoon in Bali, $25,000, additional expenses, flowers, photography, etc., $15,000. The total at the bottom, $90,000. James's accompanying note read, "As discussed with Sophia's parents, this is the contribution we expect from the mother of the groom. Be thankful I let you contribute to our special day, even if you cannot attend in person. Please transfer the funds by the end of the week." I stared at the screen, unable to process the breathtaking entitlement of what I was reading. This was not my son asking for help with wedding expenses. This was a stranger demanding that I bankrupt myself for an event I was deemed unworthy to attend. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat on my porch swing until dawn, watching the neighborhood I had called home for decades slowly come to life. The paper boy delivering his route on a bicycle, the elderly couple across the street walking their aging golden retriever, the young mother next door strapping her toddler into a car seat before heading to daycare. Simple moments of real life that suddenly seemed infinitely precious compared to the hollow world of status and appearance that had swallowed my son. As the sun rose, I felt something unexpected rising within me as well. Not just anger or hurt, but clarity, the kind that comes from finally seeing a situation for what it truly is, without the fog of hope or denial. My longtime neighbor and friend Grace brought over coffee and sat with me as I showed her the email. Her indignation on my behalf was immediate and fierce. "Beatrice, you have to tell him no. This is beyond reasonable. It is cruel." "I know," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I just need to figure out how to respond without burning the bridge completely." Grace squeezed my hand. "You raised him better than this. Something has changed him. Or someone," I added, though I knew that ultimately James was making his own choices. Sophia and her family may have influenced him, but my son was a grown man, responsible for his own actions. By mid-morning, I had drafted and redrafted my response multiple times, searching for the right words to draw a boundary while leaving room for future healing. This was not just about a wedding invitation or an outrageous bill. It was about teaching a final necessary lesson about respect, dignity, and the true nature of love. The email I finally sent to James was brief but clear typed, with steady hands, despite the turmoil in my heart. "Dear James, I have received your request for $90,000 to fund your wedding and honeymoon. While I have always supported your dreams and would have been honored to contribute to your wedding in a meaningful way, I cannot and will not fulfill this request. My love for you has never been conditional on status or financial displays. The amount you have asked for exceeds my financial capacity, and the manner of asking after explicitly uninviting me from the celebration suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be family. Instead of sending $90,000, I will place $10,000, my original intended wedding gift, into a financial literacy fund for you and Sophia. This money will be available to you both after completing a course on responsible financial planning, which I am happy to arrange. I remain open to rebuilding our relationship when you are ready for one based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. With enduring love, Mom." James's response came within minutes, a furious phone call where his words tumbled out in a mixture of shock, anger, and panic. "Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea what you have done? The Harrisons expected your contribution. We have already booked everything based on your portion of the budget." "James," I interrupted his tirade quietly, "when did we ever discuss my paying for any part of your wedding, let alone $90,000? It is just understood every family contributes to the wedding costs. The Harrisons are already covering 60%, without consulting me about any of the plans or expenses," I pointed out, and after deciding I should not attend. His voice shifted from anger to manipulation, a tactic he had never used with me before. "Mom, please. This is my future we are talking about. If we have to cancel or downgrade the wedding, Sophia will be devastated. Her parents might even reconsider their blessing. If their blessing depends on an extravagant party rather than your happiness together, Perhaps that is something worth considering, I suggested gently. The conversation ended with James hanging up after declaring I was ruining the most important day of his life. Within hours, I received a scathing text from Sophia, followed by a coldly formal email from Harold Harrison stating that without my promised contribution, they would be forced to reevaluate the entire wedding. What followed was a week of escalating pressure. James's messages swung between anger pleading and attempts to make me feel guilty. Mutual friends called to check if I was okay, clearly having heard only James's version of events. A particularly painful moment came when he posted on social media about being abandoned by family during this special time, garnering sympathy from people who knew nothing of the true situation. Meanwhile, according to Michael, who remained in contact with both of us, a crisis was unfolding between James' Sophia and her parents. The Harrisons, who had made a show of their wealth, were apparently unwilling to increase their contribution without gaining even more control over wedding decisions. Sophia was distraught at the prospect of scaling back her dream wedding, and James was caught between her expectations and financial reality. They have already put down non-refundable deposits, Michael told me during one of our coffee meetings. Now they are scrambling to find ways to cut costs without looking like they are cutting costs. Though it pained me to hear about my son's distress, I remained firm in my decision. This was not about punishment, but about boundaries, something I perhaps should have established more clearly years ago. The community whispers were difficult to bear. At the grocery store and post office, I caught sympathetic glances and hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Yet for every person who believed James's narrative of an uncaring mother, there was someone who stood by me. My former teaching colleagues, who had watched me sacrifice for James throughout his childhood, formed a protective circle around me. James's childhood friends who remembered our modest but loving home reached out with their support. Even a few parents of James's private school classmates contacted me with stories of their own adult children's entitlement issues and the difficult decisions they had made to address them. One mother's words particularly resonated with me. Sometimes the hardest form of love is saying no when they expect yes. As the wedding date approached, reports filtered back that the lavish Manhattan hotel had been exchanged for a still lovely but less prestigious venue. The guest list had been cut by a third, the designer dress exchanged for a sample sale find, and the honeymoon shortened from 2 weeks in Bali to 1 week at a less exclusive resort. Through it all, I maintained my silence publicly, while privately mourning the relationship that seemed increasingly unlikely to recover. On the morning of what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, watching my only child marry, I woke to an empty house and a weight of sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. My friends had offered to take me away for the weekend, to distract me from thoughts of the celebration I had been barred from attending, but I had declined. This was a day to be felt, not escaped. Instead, Grace and 4 other close friends arrived at my door with comfort food, old movies, and the kind of understanding that requires no explanation. We spent the day telling stories, not avoiding the topic of James, but not dwelling on it either. It was in its own way a different kind of celebration of friendships that had sustained me through loss before and would do so again. Around 6 in the evening, when the ceremony would have been taking place, Michael sent a few discreet photos. Despite everything I needed to see my son on his wedding day, the venue was tasteful, though nowhere near the opulence originally planned. James looked handsome in his tuxedo, though the strain around his eyes was visible even in the carefully posed shots. Sophia's dress was beautiful, if less elaborate than the designer creation she had initially selected. What struck me most was the expression on both their faces, not the radiant joy one hopes to see in newlyweds, but something tighter, more performative. Sophia in particular smiled for the camera, but showed flashes of disappointment when she thought no one was looking. "The vibe is weird," Michael texted. "More like a business merger than a celebration. Her parents keep making comments about making the best of things." I put my phone away, then saying a silent prayer that beneath the surface, tensions my son might find true happiness with his chosen partner regardless of the wedding's scale. The most unexpected turn came the following morning when my phone rang with Harold Harrison's number displayed on the screen. Hesitantly, I answered, "Beatrice." He began his customary confidence somewhat muted. "I feel I should inform you about certain aspects of yesterday's events. Is James all right?" I asked immediately, concern trumping any lingering resentment. "He is fine physically. The wedding proceeded without major incident." A pause. "I wanted to say that while I initially found your refusal to contribute problematic, I have come to understand your position better." This was hardly the conversation I had expected from Sophia's imperious father. "I appreciate that, Harold. It has come to my attention that James and Sophia have been less than forthcoming about their financial situation. They have apparently accumulated significant credit card debt and personal loans to maintain appearances. The revelation was painful, but not entirely surprising. I suspected as much. Margaret and I have our own financial concerns that we have perhaps been too proud to acknowledge." He continued the admission clearly difficult for him. "The economic downturn affected our investments more severely than we have let on. Our insistence on an elaborate wedding was partly motivated by keeping up appearances. I understand the pressure of appearances all too well, Harold." There was a heavy silence before he continued. "The honeymoon has been reduced to a weekend at a resort in the Hamptons. Sophia is quite disappointed, but it is what we can manage at present." After our conversation ended, I sat with this new information, finding an unexpected compassion for the Harrisons. They, like James, had become trapped in a cycle of status and appearances that required constant feeding at the expense of more meaningful values. Later that day, I received a brief text from James. "We are married. The wedding was fine." No apology, no invitation to reconnect, but at least not another attack. It was, I decided, a tiny step toward whatever our relationship might become in the future, if anything at all. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of rebuilding my life with the acceptance that my relationship with my son might be permanently altered. I volunteered more at the community center, started a book club focused on memoirs about family relationships, and even took a pottery class I had always been curious about. Slowly, the raw edges of my grief began to soften into something more manageable. 6 months after the wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with James's number. For a moment I considered not answering, protecting the fragile peace I had constructed. But maternal love won out, as it always had. "Hello, James," I said, keeping my voice neutral. What I heard was not the confident, dismissive tone I had grown accustomed to, but something I had not heard in years, my son crying. "Mom," he managed between ragged breaths. "I think my marriage is falling apart." I listened as James explained how the financial strain of the wedding and their lifestyle had created constant tension between him and Sophia. Without the grand ceremony and luxury honeymoon they had planned, Sophia had felt cheated of her perfect day. The reality of their debt had become impossible to ignore once the wedding excitement faded, leading to bitter arguments about money and priorities. "She keeps comparing our life to her friends who got married around the same time," James admitted. Their honeymoon pictures from Europe, their new condo, the car her college roommate's husband bought her as a wedding gift. "Nothing we have measures up." "I am sorry you are going through this," I said sincerely. "That must be very difficult. I keep thinking about all the things you tried to teach me growing up." He continued, his voice steadier now. "About value not being the same as price tag. About finding joy in experiences rather than things." A pause. "About the difference between people who want you in their life and people who want what you can provide for them. Those lessons are always there when you need them." I offered, careful not to sound judgmental or triumphant, despite the validation his words provided. "I need to see you, Mom. Can we meet somewhere, just to talk?" We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I arrived, James was already waiting, looking both older and somehow younger than when I had last seen him. The expensive watch and designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt and jeans that reminded me of the boy he had once been. Our conversation began awkwardly, both of us carefully navigating the hurt that lay between us. But as the hours passed, something of our old connection resurfaced. James spoke openly about the pressure he had felt to succeed in Sophia's world, how her approval had become a currency he constantly strived to earn, and how in the process he had lost sight of the values that had once defined him. "I am truly sorry, Mom," he said finally, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "What I did was inexcusable. Cutting you out of my wedding, then demanding money. I do not even recognize that person now. We all lose our way sometimes," I told him, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "The important thing is finding the path back to ourselves." Over the following months, our reconciliation progressed slowly through regular Sunday dinners and honest conversations. I maintained clear financial boundaries, refusing to bail out James and Sophia from their debt, but offering emotional support and practical advice when asked. To my surprise, I received a call from the community center director asking if I would be interested in teaching a financial literacy class for young adults. Apparently my story, or some version of it, had made its way through the community grapevine, and there was interest in learning about managing expectations and finances in relationships. The class became an unexpected source of healing for me, transforming my painful experience into wisdom that could benefit others. When James hesitantly asked if he could attend one session, I welcomed him with open arms, but no special treatment, watching with quiet pride as he shared his own experiences with the group. Sophia initially resisted our renewed relationship, seeing me perhaps as a reminder of the scaled-back wedding she still resented. But economic necessity eventually brought her to our Sunday dinners as well, where she gradually revealed a more vulnerable side beneath her polished exterior. Her own parents' financial facade had crumbled completely, forcing them to sell one of their homes and adjust to a more modest lifestyle that had shaken her sense of security and identity. The most profound lesson from this painful chapter was not about money at all, but about the nature of love. True love, whether between parent and child spouses or friends, requires respect, not just financial support or superficial gestures. It thrives on authenticity rather than appearances and grows stronger through challenges honestly faced together. Over time, I watched James and Sophia slowly rebuild their marriage on a more honest foundation. They moved to a smaller apartment, created a debt repayment plan, and began talking about what truly mattered to them beyond status and possessions. Whether their relationship would ultimately survive remained to be seen, but they were at least asking the right questions now. As for me, I found an unexpected gift in the space created by our estrangement and reconciliation. In standing firm against James's demands, I had discovered strengths I did not know I possessed and built connections with friends and community that enriched my life in ways I had never anticipated. The painful bill that once seemed designed to diminish me had instead led to growth wisdom and a deeper understanding of my own worth, a value that could never be calculated in dollars or measured against someone else's expectations. Where do you draw the line between supporting your loved ones and enabling harmful behavior? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and maintaining your self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family relationships with dignity and love. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is never determined by someone else's balance sheet.